You wake up with a black hood over your head, your hands and your feet are bound. Since you can't see anything, you focus on what you hear. You hear a rustling sound beside you. You hear someone else walk in the room. The person that walked in must be the one that's abducted and bound you. He speaks. He starts with a threat. You can hear that he's grabbed and is speaking to the person who is bound next to you. You listen carefully to their dialogue. You're going to do everything I say, or I'll kill you right here. Your fellow captor has courage and refuses to be forced into submission. He screams back to your captor, "Well, kill me then." Bam! You hear a gunshot and the sound of a limp, lifeless body fall to the ground beside you. You now hear the killer walking over towards you. He issues the same threats. He's already killed the person next to you. You know he's capable and willing to kill. You want to live. He demands obedience in order to let you live. The only way out of this situation alive is to obey. He then demands that as he allows you to run free, you proclaim your love for him everywhere you go from this day forward, and also that it must not be fake but sincere. He demands that you compliment him publicly and declare that every good thing in your life is attributed to him because after all, you're only alive because he is allowing you to be alive. You wouldn't have experienced anything good tomorrow if he killed you today. This killer also wants everyone else to think of him the same way, and also to be aware of what happened to your fellow captor. He wants them to know that the same will happen to them if they don't follow suit with you. In the midst of your proclaimed love and compliments, you feel some other feeling. It's always been there. You've repeated your forced love and compliments so often, you've started to believe it. And that's why you feel such conflict of this other, suppressed, almost forgotten emotion that's been hiding under the surface the whole time. It's fear. Thank you for joining us today for part 3, the conclusion of my journey out of organized religion. Today we're going to be focusing on the fear aspect of why I left. The scripture is filled with admonitions to fear God, both Old and New Testament. Death threats are frequently issued by God as a warning of punishment for disobedience. God often points to others he's executed as a reminder that his death threats are very real, and no one is too important to be sacrificed if he's angry enough. There's no denying how many Sunday morning testimonies I heard where someone confessed that the message from the preacher about burning in eternal hellfire drove them in fear to submit to the church. Fear is a major component of the Abrahamic religions, and it has been a very effective and very profitable tool. Malachi tells us God doesn't change, but observe what the disciples of Jesus tell us about fear. Hebrews 2:14 says, "For as much then as the children are partakers of flesh and blood, he also himself likewise took part of the same, that through death he might destroy him that had the power of death, that is, the devil, and deliver them who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage." 1 John 4:18 says, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear has torment. He that fears is not made perfect in love." If you found yourself in the above situation with a human captor, think about how you would view this captor. Put yourself in the position of the first hostage he killed. Your life ended simply to make an example and to empower your murderer to manipulate other people. Think from the perspective of the survivor who obeyed the captor so they would be allowed to live. And consider the perspective of an outside observer. This situation is directly referenced in Hebrews chapter 2 verses 14 and 15. The captor uses fear, specifically the fear of death, in order to make his captives subject to a lifetime of bondage. The Hebrews writer ascribes this methodology to one we're taught to hate and view as our adversary from the beginning, the devil. And in the Christian mind, this connection fits. So let's dive in and understand this passage better. If the devil uses fear to subject human beings to a lifetime of bondage, what else can we say about someone who uses fear in such a way? Think about the psych profile of the biblical devil, or more practically, a human who operates this way. Narcissistic maybe? Arrogant? Egotistical? Selfish? Sociopathic? Angry? What do we suspect they feel towards their victims? A lack of empathy? Hatred maybe? Resentment if the victim is behaving as if they're entitled, and they probably feel superior to the victim. Why does someone leverage fear? It's often thought to be signs of someone hiding some kind of weakness or insecurity. In that person's mind, it could be the only way to achieve obedience or acceptance from other people or power for oneself. It could potentially be the result of some sort of hatred or fear on their part as well. The fear that the subject may pose a threat if they gain their independence, or choose someone else to follow or promote if left to their own devices. Generally speaking, we would not look at a captor who behaves this way as a good person. Fear is a tool of tyrants and bullies. Personally, I believe that 100% of the time, one who wields fear for control is actually dealing with some amount of weakness or insecurity within themselves. So they attempt to project a facade of strength to those they are seeking to subdue. I cannot find it in myself to ever respect this type of person. Now, whether the captor is seeking to alleviate his own guilt or just because he realizes the resources he can command by subduing his victim, he attempts to paint this narrative where his captive eventually forgives and maybe even grows to be fond of him. The only kind of love that can result from fear is one born from torment. It is a twisted kind of love, not one that is genuine and not one that's comforting. These personalities rely on fear because they themselves fear that without it, they cannot subdue their subjects. They cannot earn your love and cannot prove themselves selflessly concerned enough about your own well-being to deserve your unquestioning obedience and respect. 1 John 4:18 says, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear has torment. He that fears is not made perfect in love." I love this contrast. In 1 John 4:18, John explains that God is love and proceeds to distinguish love from fear. There is no fear in love. Perfect love casts out fear. Fear carries torment with it, but love should be comforting. A person that holds fear cannot be made perfect in love. This paints a very clear picture how far away fear is from love. And if God is love, then fear must be far away from God also. As freely as John does here, we should be able to speak against fear in those who wield it. As stated in 2 Corinthians 6:1, people are workers together with God. As when Jesus visited a town without faith and performed no miracles, likewise, if fear is present, according to 1 John 4:18, the natural means are less available for the Creator to perform its most perfect work through people, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. Wherever fear is present, the person in fear is being tormented, and the loving Creator that John is describing and that Jesus declared would never torment you. Torment and fear are the complete opposite end of the spectrum from the loving Creator being described here. The Creator desires to free you from torment, to free you from fear. There should be no place for fear in the vicinity of anything relating to the loving Creator being described. In 2 Timothy 1:7, it also says, "For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." Fear does not come from the same Creator. The presence and characteristics of perfected love of God prevents fear from occupying the same space. These characteristics are consistent with what we see from Jesus. When asked by a demonic spirit whether he was come to torment them, he merely removes them from the person that they were said to inhabit. He doesn't even torment demons, let alone murder humans for petty transgressions. Rather, he casts them out to prevent further torment to the man they were inhabiting. Another example, when faced with an adulterer, a sin punishable by death in his culture, he successfully advocated for her freedom, paving the way for her forgiveness, and removed any reason for her to fear for her life. When put to death besides a criminal, he found the love to let that criminal know that his mindset allowed him the forgiveness that he so desperately sought. Even after knowing he would be cursed and denied 3 times by one of his closest followers, he still offers that man a chance to profess his love 3 times, providing him a well thought out solution to not only restore him, but to also undo the psychological torment of his transgression. 3 professions of love to absolve 3 denials. This man is a strong example among many of how the Creator's love is supposed to look. All love, no fear, no threats, no violence, only a perfect love, reverence, and appreciation for the sanctity of life. I'll admit, the way I presently endeavor to provide spiritual guidance to people feels more genuine and meaningful to me. It feels like a calling to help all people I cross paths with, not just some small set of people who are obedient to Christian leadership or who think and believe like I do. I resonate with this path more because I feel it is a greater expression of love than the work I did in the For Christians Only ministry. And that gives me all the confidence and authority and confirmation that I need to continue. As a minister, I knew that if I had any kind of differing view with the scripture, I was to accept the blame for being too short-sighted or ignorant of a larger plan and concede that biblical decrees are always right. But in the deep recesses of my mind where I'm utterly honest with myself, these apostolic statements on fear don't mesh with the character of God shown in the Old Testament. Old Testament scripture provides very clear instruction. Fear God. We see death threats used often in the pages of the Bible. It's noteworthy that those were not idle or hollow threats either. While having not conducted my own study on this, but being familiar enough with the Bible to know that it's non-zero, researchers have reported that about 3 million human deaths were attributed to the being who made these threats and self-identified as God in the Old Testament. A simple search of Old Testament phrases like put to death or shall surely die turns up dozens of instances where people are threatened with death for getting out of line. At the very least, I can kind of understand the death penalty when severe harm has been done to another person. And there are plenty of those types of death threats, right? But here are some of the non-life-threatening crimes that one could be put to death for in the Old Testament. In Exodus 19:12, death for passing by the boundaries set by Moses and approaching the mountain where he spoke with God. Exodus 21:15 and 17, death for striking or cursing a parent. Exodus 22:19, death for bestiality. Exodus 31:14 and 15 and 35:2, death for working on or otherwise improperly honoring the Sabbath day. In Numbers 151, death for a stranger who comes near while the Levites are pitching the tabernacle tent. In Deuteronomy 24, a parent will not be put to death for the sins of the children, nor the children for the sins of their parents, but you will be put to death for your own sin. In 2 Chronicles 15:13, death for not seeking God, no matter if you're small or great, man or woman. Now, imagine your encounters with such a being who has shown himself very willing and capable of executing so many human beings without a second thought. You would have the same reactions as recorded about many people in the scripture. You would ask, have you come to kill me? Or can I please ask this question without you slaughtering me? Consider again the ways of a loving creator as illustrated by the life Christ lived. Carefully compare that picture to the entity who demands and thrives on the fear of its subjects and made people subject to a lifetime of fearing whether they would be destroyed for some offense. Refer to the graphic chart here. What we see in this graphic is on the left-hand side, the horizontal rows are love and fear as a subject, and on the top we have on the left column the Old Testament God, and as a contrast in the right-hand column, Jesus in the New Testament, or the way that Jesus professes and describes his creator in the New Testament. So if we look at how these things pair up, right? You look at love. For the Old Testament God, love was rarely shown in the way that we would describe and regard love shown from one human to another person. Also, it would often still result in harm being done to other people. As a contrast, love in the New Testament, it was present in every word and every action of Jesus and that of his creator. And that love never causes harm. You look at fear. For the Old Testament God, fear was always present and had heavy use. Fear in the New Testament, however, was never present and was of no use or benefit to Jesus and his creator. As you see, Jesus and his creator in the New Testament always chose love and never used fear. It's the complete opposite for the Old Testament God. Now, it was ingrained in me to play defense and to profess that the love which God showed through Jesus Christ was the only reason that I came to the church. Fear has nothing to do with it. But I don't think that's totally sincere. At least it wasn't for me. Now, regardless of the love of God we perceive through Jesus, the New Testament church still preaches the biblical threats of eternity and hellfire if we don't now obey the love version of the story. The apostles have shown us how far away and different fear is from the loving creator that Jesus knew and showed to us. And if that is the true picture of God, and God doesn't change, and fear has no place with love, and love has no use of fear, all these things led me to the conclusion that something did indeed change between the Old Testament and the New Testament. So either 1, God changed and Malachi was wrong, or 2, God indeed doesn't change and the character we see identify itself as God in the Old Testament is not the true God, nor the same God identified to us by and through Jesus Christ. In other words, God didn't change, but was misidentified and misrepresented in some of the Old Testament Jewish texts. The ministry of Jesus was meant to show us the character of the real creator. I'm sure my viewers know by now that I align with the second statement. It is my belief that the murderous, threatening entity with whom the Israelites interacted in the Old Testament and who identified itself as God was not the creator, not Jesus' Father. The story has been polluted. To summarize, I believe that there were at least 2 very important concepts that Jesus endeavored to leave with us at the conclusion of his ministry. 1, any religion with a chosen people, a wrathful and jealous God, and religious laws tied to death threats will prevent us from mirroring the love of the true creator towards all of its creatures. 2, fear has been weaponized to keep us from acknowledging and actuating our connection with the creator, a connection which Jesus prayed we would realize in John 17. Now, it's my opinion that this is part of the reason why Jesus attempted to reset the religious mindset of his people during this time, especially as seen in the Beatitudes and his interaction with the religious leaders of the day. He challenges the Mosaic law, its penalties, and the overseers of that law during his time. Now, by the apostles' teaching, if I have to be subdued by fear, the one wielding fear is tormenting you. The being they served as God repeatedly used the fear of death to subject the Israelites to a lifetime of bondage. The Hebrews writer only names one character who does this. Do you believe him? Because I do. Don't forget to check out our new merch store on Shopify, where you can get clothing from Infinite Insight, clothing from all the different brands I'm involved in, including the music from DMF clothing. We have the Forge Striker clothing and from the Mind Forge podcast. All the merch at the Shopify store printed here. And go grab your gear right now so you can show everybody what you stand for, what you're about. Hey, thanks for watching our video and sharing with us one of your most important resources, your time. Continue to seek truth, reclaim your knowledge, your existence, and your reality. And you already know how this works. Like, share, comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications if you want to help this channel work towards a better future. But most importantly, I hope this channel has helped you. Take care.